And the Uber crashed into me.
But fuck that Uber shit. Tell me what happened the hours before when you were drinking in the atelier and working at the same time.
Like we had music on, we were listening to Jacques Brel. Like we were like really getting into like a deep cut, you know, on some Brussels shit. And that day I was like in a comic book store, and the only like title that I recognize is Erge. C'est qui le mec de Tintin? Hergé, lui. And I was like, oh, this must be a Brussels comic book. And so I start going through the comic book, and I see Tintin, whatever, and then I see this other one of like, what's it called? Luc et... Quick Quack. I see the Quick Quack one, and it's like really innocent, and like the drawings are really fucking cool. And I looked through it, and I was like, oh wow, it'd be really cool to make one of these a work. Because like always since I was little, I grew up with European comic books, but in America. And so being in Brussels, I was like, damn, I really want to sample a primary source material from Brussels. And so last night, because I only have 2 nights in the studio, and we were drinking quite a bit, I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to make these pieces right now, right here, you know? And so we were basically just doing that, just putting the glue, printing things out, cutting, listening to Jacques Brel. And it was only this morning where I started revealing like the other 2, because there are 3 images. The first image is of a police officer. He has like very skinny legs, he has a big like jacket, and he's behind a tree, and he has one of those things like a slingshot, and it's very aggressive, it's very powerful. And then the one in the middle is it's a wall that said c'était quoi encore? C'était poster défendu. Défendu d'afficher, so it means like you cannot put a poster here. And then the fucking Spirou, I don't know who, he puts a poster on top of it saying you can strictly not put a poster here. So it's like a poster helping out the police, but it's also doing what the police didn't want him to do. And then the third one is like when I saw it, I thought it was the most beautiful image in the comic book. It's like a classic Brussels guy, okay? Bolok, like very strong. He's a soccer player. He has the Brussels colors with the Brussels flag, and he's about to hit a penalty kick. And he's in full motion. He almost looks like a Greek freeze figure, you know? And what I like it is that it says penalty. And for some reason, something about the word penalty in Brussels like makes sense, you know? Like, but after, it was only once I peeled off all the pages and I saw them that I was like with some friends that are from Brussels, and they're like, wow, Nico, this is actually super narrative of our like life growing up in Brussels. There's a whole relationship to football, to like violence related to football, and also graffiti and mark making, and that like relationship with the police that a lot of like adolescents, a lot of youth like have. And I really didn't know it was like that. Like our relationship to the police in America is like much more different, which I thought was interesting. I thought it made the work a bit more apt, but it wasn't my intention at all to make something about a specific matter. So yeah, that's what's been going on recently. That was last night. That was your question, huh?
Yeah, but early on in your explanations, you said you want to use it as primary source. Mm-hmm. What do you mean with the primary source word?
So, as an artist, and all artists can relate to this, when you're walking in the street, you're looking at a magazine, you're seeing a movie, there's a moment of inspiration where you think, wow, that is so cool, I want to turn that into something else. You have this desire to have your own agency and transform it into something else. That's primary source. Primary source is walking in the street and you see a billboard and it's beautiful and you're like, wow, that could be art, or I can make that better, or I can tag over that. And so in my practice, I have 2 different types of ways of thinking conceptually. Some works that are just a primary source, where I'll make a sculpture of a stack of newspapers and I'll just put it in resin. It'll be exactly the same way I found it. And in that moment, I'm more acting like a curator and just putting en avant the primary source, putting en avant the thing that made me feel desire, the thing that made me want to make something more of it. And then the second half of my practice is what I do with the primary source. It's the remixing of it. It's seeing the images and then being an artist, kind of almost being a tool, and creating a system in which I can remix things where it doesn't even become the first image. It becomes like a pure image that's completely independent from what it was originally. And conceptually, an image is supposed to be a rectangle that transports you into a different place. Or an advertisement is supposed to communicate a message to you. But growing up in New York, and honestly any city in the 21st century where we're just being sold a lot of things, we see images every day, and we see them in such different formats and contexts and thresholds that recontextualize them. And because they have this physical interaction with their environment, they get scratched up, there's wear on them, they start having their own independence. I'll see a picture or like you'll see a portrait of a family on a bus, and it's scratched to the point where it looks like a blurry Gerhard Richter painting from the 60s, you know? So I think that what I try to do with my secondary source, like my remixing, is that I'm trying to replicate that independence that the image has, where it's not even about the image. And a lot of people, and I think that a lot of artists need to start understanding their practice and stand up for themselves a bit more, because whenever you sample things that you see on the streets or advertisements, people always say, oh, it's about consumerism. Your practice is about consumerism. And that's so dumb. And a lot of these artists, they're like, oh, I guess my practice is about consumerism because I'm sampling like signage. No. That's simply the context in which you arrived to the image. That's simply the context in which you saw that image. But the context doesn't really have anything to do with the reason you chose it, you know? When I'm choosing these images, I'm choosing like cigarette packages, condoms, lottery tickets, images I've taken, old notebooks, future projects. I'm not an expert in any of those fields, but it's just a instant like connection that I have that I just don't doubt or question.
But basically, talk me through the process or the way you made those images interact or ripping off their context. Because now you like talk a lot about the meaning and what you want to do, but you're not explaining the way you do it.
Like the technique itself?
The technique itself, or
yeah.
What's going on when you late in the atelier and you start doing things.
I don't like treat the material as something that's super special or precious. I'm not the type of artist who stretches the canvas and knows how the image is going to look after 1 week of making it. Every decision I make, there's jeopardy. It could go one of two ways. And as I said before, I believe in systems, and I really like, it's kind of like what John Cage said, about creating a set of settings and parameters where whatever I'm looking for is more likely to happen, even if I don't know what that thing is. And my studio, basically, when you walk in, is just a bunch of stacks of papers of images, canvas on the floor, and glue. And my approach is very much about not really questioning, and it's more about like treating my practice as labor. I don't go into the studio and search my soul. I don't go into the studio and play a song that reminds me of an ex, and then I write like I love you and cross it out, like some shit like that. What I do is that I just have a studio. It looks like an usine. It looks like a factory. And the decisions I make in the studio are all based on, did I destroy the piece yet or not? Because you don't know how many works I've had where I put too many images, I do too many things, and the image collapses on itself. And it looks simply bad. It doesn't look digestible at all, you know? And conceptually, I can't even make sense of it either. And so, one thing that saves me from that is the fact that I like seeing graffiti on the streets, but I also love the way graffiti looks once it's painted over and the paint is slightly off. Like that ironic side, I think that's as beautiful as the graffiti, if not more, you know? So I also incorporate that.
Okay, but I want to interrupt you and go back to the labor.
Yeah.
To the labor action and
Yeah.
like tell me about the canvas, because there is something you do not prepare any canvas. You not prep the canvas, you just start to print it.
Yeah.
Tell me the reasons behind it, and also it's not simple canvas.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important in your work, but you never really go into details in what kind of textile it is.
So the first canvas I used was just the cheapest I could find at a place called Textile Discount in Pilsen. And it was basically just normal canvas, but it was a bit thin, but not too thin. And the reason that I got that roll, I got 15 meters for $100. And it just allowed me to demystify what it meant to make a painting. My whole life for me, making painting was like for geniuses, and you had to stretch it, and it felt like such a huge thing. But the moment I was able to get cheap canvas and just have a lot of it in the studio, having the canvas not be stretched just allows me just to feel the canvas more, you know. I don't prep it because I just don't know how to. The way I see my practice is kind of cheating in a way, you know. Yeah, I'm neither a photographer or a painter, so.
That was one of the questions I prepared, that your work can be seen or misinterpreted as painting.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's not the question I'm gonna ask, because you just said you're like you're a cheater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Relate the painting and the cheater in one way, like
how does that?
yeah, put those two because I think that's what you want to say. You're a cheater in painting.
It feels like cheating because I've never fully been a painter and I've never fully been a photographer. And when I first started making work, I wanted to get into this undergraduate painting program called Slade. Because when I was in school in Chicago, it was just very much about being an artist for the sake of being bohemian, for the lifestyle. Like friends taking drugs and just like not really talking about art or doing arts, you know? More about just hanging out. And I really wanted to be an artist, and I thought that Europe was going to change that a bit, and it completely did. So when I went to London, it was more about being an artist for the sake of arts, not for the sake of making a political statement, you know? And the only reason I got into that program, Slade, is because I submitted these photos of these paintings that were all done with glue and the heat transfers, and I said they were acrylic, you know, because they would have never accepted me if not. And so I get to Slade, and I'm literally like the American that pulls up with a bucket of glue and posters. And I had to have a crash course on painting and how to be an artist and how to talk about your practice and defend it, because I was just, well, British people are very polite, but like obviously it was like, what are you doing, you know? And so I started realizing that the reason I identify with this aspect of cheating is because there's such a long history of painting and the effort behind painting, and I really do respect that, but I simply just don't have the patience for it. I don't have the means for it. And the only reason I like to think of works as paintings is because conceptually it puts people in a certain frame of mind in which they view the work. There's a really good artist called Bonivardi, and he would make these paintings. He would use paint, but he would also have the canvas coming out a bit, or he'll have a canvas on top of it. And he calls them constructions. And for me, I love that word. For me, my work is making kind of these constructions. For me, it's about making surfaces. I'm not even making paintings. It's almost more like Mark Bradford, where people say they're paintings, but they're physical surfaces. So I feel like I'm creating surfaces. Yeah.
Yeah, now that you're talking about constructions, maybe we can go into your internship with Oscar Murillo.
Mm-hmm.
Why you did the internship and how it affected your work. We already talked like how an exhibition of Oscar Murillo kept me into the art world instead of doing something completely else.
Yeah.
And that's maybe why I'm so attracted to your work and why you came back to Brussels to do an exhibition with the gallery.
Yeah, because also Brussels does have that energy that Oscar also has, like that approach, that kind of informal, constructivist approach. Love his practice, and Oscar was like the first time I realized that I could be an artist. I saw his show at David Zoyner, like his big show when I was like 12, and we spoke there, and then did a studio visit when I was like super young with my family, and we saw a studio, and at the time I thought that like being an artist was being a maestro, you know. I grew up around a lot of geometric abstraction, and all of those artists are like super precise with everything they do. They're geniuses, and I thought, oh, I'm not an artist because I'm not a genius, you know, which is great because I had a lot of privacy as a teenager making my arts, you know, because I never had that pressure of thinking I'm an artist. I never submitted anything to any scholarships. But when I went to Oscar Murillo's studio, he said, oh, it's okay, you can step on the painting, and I'm like, what? And he was disorganized, and he was this and that, and I was like, that's kind of like me, like I'm not perfect either, you know. But Oscar's fucking smart. Like, Oscar knows exactly what he's not random at all. But I remember this one time we're in the studio, and he was making these lines, these like really cool lines, and I thought, oh, in my head I'm like 14, I'm like, oh, I can do really good lines. Like I could help him. Like he would be blessed to have my lines because my lines are really good. I know how to do this, you know. I do it all the time. And I didn't ask him because I was too scared. But I was like, damn, like he does lines, I can do lines. And so there was always this thing in the back of my head of like, maybe it isn't the traditional sense of like being a superstar Andy Warhol type, or being a Monet classical painter type, or being like an entrepreneur Jeff Koons type, or just being like a golden star Tracy Emmons who just got the sauce, you know. Maybe there's an aspect where it's more informal and it's more about just the practice conceptually and the act of doing it. Not so much what you make, but the act of doing it, you know. Because what Oscar was able to do for me was he was able to just be himself, and he knew where to situate himself in our history, and he knew how to conceptually explain it well, you know. And he doesn't compromise with anyone's like narrative of what his work is, you know. And for me, it was completely freeing. So when I was making work in Chicago, it was mostly like posters. It was things that were very direct, and so. Well, the problem is that I don't really know how my work is like Murillo's.
It was how you were working on the canvas or showing the canvas afterwards.
Yeah.
The only thing is you stretch it really nicely.
Yeah.
He's like looking at it at an installation.
Yeah.
But this is why I think we had a discussion yesterday about what I liked about the canvases you used and why I thought it was a shame that you stretch it. and then I had to apologize because I was kind of forcing you to not stretch it, which is not my role.
Yeah. But I think you're right, because it does make sense from an Oscar Murillo train of thought and all that, and also the way I'm approaching the canvas. But for me, it's like there's a quote that says that artists should be organized in their life and chaotic in their work. And for me, the real work is being in the studio making the work. The moment I stretch it, it's like giving birth. The moment I stretch it, it's no longer me. The moment I stretch it, it's no longer like labor. It's no longer like a direct relationship. When I stretch it, what I'm basically doing is baptizing it and being like, okay, ciao, you're no longer mine. So emotionally, it's good to stretch things because it becomes part of the world's and not for me, you know. And it's good because then it's organized, it's tight, and I can kind of see it as a stranger. Because if I don't stretch it, emotionally I'm way too close to it. It's kind of like when you were telling me that you did an artist studio of a friend of yours, and you had to forget he was your friend. You had to completely forget that you knew this guy, and it was only when he became an inconnu that you realized he was a great artist. And so for me, it's kind of the same thing. When I stretch it, I'm like, oh, who did this? You know, like I'll walk around the room and pretend I don't know, and I'll be like, do I like this? Do I not? And so that's why stretching helps me do that. To answer your question.
Yeah. I was gonna take the opportunity of the podcast or the artist talk, whatever you want to call it, to find out why the stretching of the canvas was so important.
Yeah.
But didn't you ever thought of like just hanging the canvas raw without the wood? Just basically put the canvas on the wall?
Yes, but only as a sculpture, not as a painting. So now I have this one work that I'm going to make, and it's going to be on the floor. It's going to be canvas, and it's basically I'm going to get resin, and I'm going to get one canvas that's very crumply on the floor, and I'm just going to put resin all over it. That way it's super strong, and then I'm going to get the canvas, and I'm going to glue it on top of the resin one. That way it doesn't feel like a canvas. That way it feels like a sculpture, but it's obviously canvas. I think that there's a lot of artists that don't stretch their work. And that really is about kind of going against art history, kind of breaking down and tearing down systems. I still haven't cultivated like the conceptual like backing for me to start attacking art history, for me to start attacking institutions and establishments. I don't feel comfortable doing that yet. I don't have the confidence to do that yet. So if the day I show a canvas unstretched, I need to know exactly why I'm doing that. And I'm not just going to show canvas unstretched because it's like trendy and it's going to look cute and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like I take this shit very seriously, and like I want there to be a reason why it's unstretched when I unstretch it. Because it's like a lot. It's like making sculptures with wood. Like wood is such a special material, and people just use it as if it's nothing, you know? There's so much importance to everything you do, because we're dealing with things in the physical world. We're dealing with materials, you know? And if you don't have a system for your materials, if you don't have like care for them, then what you're doing is just basically just like Shiba.
Maybe like the fact that you stretch it, kind of making sense, because I was like finding a counter argument to what you were saying, but actually I think it the opposite. Like in beginning of the talk, you said that you go into the atelier, you start to make some labor, you start working, and you have no idea how the end result will be. Because you're gonna stretch it, and because you go from left to right, and then you overprint it, you put another image. You sometimes you go a bit over the top of the canvas, over the corner. If you wouldn't stretch it, you would have the control of the image. Is it one of the reasons that stretching is important, or you didn't really?
No, that's probably the part I hate the most about stretching, is losing these little bits and details. It really hurts me.
I just thought it was important in your work that you lose this control of the end product.
Yeah, it is, but like just aesthetically, because I really believe in not being a author, but in being a tool. Like I really feel like a tool. Like the same way my printer prints things, I feel like I'm a printer and I'm just like a vessel for something else, you know? Not that I'm being called by a higher power or anything like that, but I'm just doing labor, and I'm not making these choices like consciously, you know? Like the same way that like you know, like on the streets, I don't know if you guys have this as much as like in Brussels, but in America, New York, when there's like marks on the streets, there's like sometimes for construction they'll put arrows or numbers or letters, and there'll be like a bunch of different colors. And once you start seeing those are really cool. Those are like great like mark making, you know? The guys doing it, they're not thinking about how they're doing it. They're not thinking about the importance of it. They're not thinking of it like as like, wow, this is gonna look really cool and some teenager's gonna take a picture of it. And that's the same thing that I do. I kind of like this idea of chance, you know, of it not all being in your control, and kind of just making a surface in which memory and chance and moments of intuition like can all happen at the same time. Because the thing is that I'm not interested in art, and this honestly it's crazy to say, but what I'm not interested in art for visual sense. You know, it's not that like I want to show the world the best painting of a tree they've ever seen, or I want to show the world the way that I see bars after midnight. The reason that I'm interested in making art and being an artist is because I kind of want to like capture moments in the present so that there's space in the future, you know, and kind of transport that into the future a bit. And
that's really interesting what you're just saying, because like you just used the word aesthetic a few times, and in preparation of the talk, with your portfolio, I read some text. I listened to other talks you had, and there is one, and the conversations we had before, there is one word that's always come back, is aesthetic. So I had a kind of feeling you were like pursuing aesthetic choices. And I was wondering why the aesthetics of your works were so important to you.
Important? What do you mean so important to
because like it feels that for you it's important, but a lot of artists your age, especially in Belgium, aesthetics is something, especially if they're in art school, there's something that left out of their work. It's not something they're pursuing.
Why do you think they leave it out of their work?
I don't know, it's something they say. Maybe it's not true.
No, I think it's true. I think
maybe it's not true what they say, but
I don't know. For me, maybe it's growing up in New York in a very like visual environment and like just communicating with visual objects directly, or it's kind of, and this is a whole different conversation, but I'm a bit, and saying you're tired of postmodernism is like saying that like water is wet, but I'm a bit, I'm not as fascinated anymore with like this idea that like postmodernism is like the cool kid on the block and stuff like that. Like there is something great about a good image. There is something great about like something that can communicate itself effectively. For me, like aesthetic, I only really like deal with aesthetic, like representational aesthetic, when I make primary source material. When it's like the screenshot on my computer, or the streets, or the bidet, you know, because then it's directly pulling from something that's already made. But I don't know if it applies the same way when I'm making these works, like the work that's on the floor with the iron. That's not so much about aesthetic, but it's about process. But I feel like, if we make art, aesthetic is important par défaut. You know, it's like being a racer and not talking about running, you know? Like, we're all dealing with aesthetic. And maybe just the reason I use that word a lot is because it's the only word to kind of describe, like, the visual field in which we use objects with, you know?
I think it's a good time to switch to the school switch.
Yeah.
Because you had two different mentalities in your whole school career.
Yeah.
Chicago was more on commercial aspect of the arts.
Yeah.
And then you went to London, it was more conceptual aspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it a big change for you? Was it hard to process? Or?
Yeah. It was like it was a huge change. In Chicago, as I said before, it was really about the Art Institute of Chicago has become like an industry nowadays. That's the school I went to, and they're really concerned about professionalizing kids, you know, and making their money's worth for how much they paid. And so when I was in the Art Institute, it kind of felt like a glorified summer camp. I did everything. I did furniture design, architecture, photography, video, graphic design, printmaking. And I realized that in Chicago it was very much about, the ones who were making art, it was very much about making art for the sake of political reasons, social political reasons. So it was about making art for the sake of making a statement, you know. But when I got to London, it was really about making art for the sake of art. It wasn't about making statements, but about asking interesting questions, you know. And I think the biggest switch that was for me was seeing people my age take this seriously and really care about it, you know, and like read like philosophy, politics, take aspects from the outside world from life and create systems in which it all nurtures their practice. In Chicago, it was more commercial. In America, it's more commercial par défaut than Europe, well, the UK, but in Chicago, what was happening a lot is a lot of like sampling of images and like that whole airbrush trends that was like going on from like the early 2020s. There was still a lot of kids like reviving that, and I think that's really cool, you know, especially if you're a young person doing that. But it's not I don't know, it wasn't what I was interested in that much, and I think London was good because it made me reject that commercial aspect, you know, that commercial aspect to making work. Because nowadays what a lot of kids do is that they finish their first year at university, like in America, and their biggest obsession in life is getting a show with a gallery right after, or right after a master's program, you know? And what ends up happening is that artists only start making one type of work, and they're known for making one type of work. And everyone's, like, all these painters' dreams is really to be Izzy Wood, if you do representational stuff. Like, one style, and just select different things to do, you know? And that's something that happens in a lot in America because it's so commercial, the way we approach the practice. And also just the infrastructure of America right now, it's too expensive to go out to bars and talk about shit. The studio spaces don't exist, so it's not like in Brussels where you have space. Brussels is kind of like the Chicago of Europe. In Brussels, there's, as I was saying like yesterday, it really feels like a small village. And it really feels like a place in which you can be an artist and be young, and expand your practice and experiment in your practice and make multiple different styles and have no style, you know, approaching the work as the start of an adventure, not as like something that has to be professionalized. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but that's, I think you already answered or giving some, well, you already said something about the topic I wanted to give you was your connection with Brussels. Yeah, you took a randomly flight ticket, like I think it was February. Okay, you had like, and you had the opportunity to show work. Yeah. Then you ended like for a week spending time with other artists. Yeah. That was also not really on your schedule
at all.
Now we're end of May. We already have another. We already have another show. This time it's a proper show, not an occasion to show some works.
Exactly.
And you have your own atelier in Brussels. It's really temporary. It's short term, but you still have it. And if I understand, you will come back in August.
Yeah, it's the 21st century, and all of these articles are talking about the next big city. You know, Berlin is dead, New York is dead. No. Like, where's the scene? Where's the scene? Where's the scene? And it's just so lame, and everyone's like so exhausted about trying to find the art scene or whatever. You know, and I'm not saying that like it's here in Brussels, but like what I do know is that Brussels is a village, and we're like, if you know someone, you really know them, you know, and you know their history, you know their parents, you know their mom, and there's kind of this sense of opportunity that existed in the 20th century that you hear about in art history. When I first came to Brussels, it was because a gallery reached out to me, and they had a gallery Nosco, a great gallery that shows in international fairs, run by Cyril, who's been showing for the past few years. He even showed Léo Bon. There's a great artist duo group, and they do fabulous works here in Brussels. I had the opportunity to come, and so I came. I showed work dans une vitrine, but when I came to the city, I was like, wow, Brussels is like every single European city in Europe, but like no other European city. Because any European city you go to, you're like, this is Paris, this is London, no. Brussels feels like the default European city in a very organic way. That was an aspect I liked a lot about it. Also, there's an economic reality here, which is really different from America, or from London, or from Paris, and there's opportunities like this right now, being in an abandoned balloon factory.
Yeah, this used to be a balloon factory.
Yeah, but here there's like a sense of optimism that I really appreciate, and like young people really do feel like anything is possible in a way, you know, and like they kind of chase after their dreams. And also like historically, Brussels, like Belgium has a huge art history, which is why I think that's so interesting how the youth are kind of rejecting that now, and they're making all these like low key works that aren't aesthetic at all.
Maybe the last thing I wanted to know, and that's something, if you don't know the person behind the artist, like Nico Tovar, but then the friend Nico, is you portraying yourself. I mean, every artist is kind of portraying himself in his works, but you do it with the shapes of the shadows of yourself.
Yeah.
And it's maybe not in the recent work, but you did it a lot before.
But whenever I show myself in the work, I pretend like it's not me. For me, it's a entry point into something bigger, into a different conversation, you know? Or whenever I sample my friend in a work, it won't be because of my relationship with that person. Like, okay, I can use this character, this figure right here, so that anyone can put themselves into this person. That's why, like, you don't see my face. That's why it's not that obvious, you know? But one of my biggest inspirations is really, like, late Byzantine art. And I love that type of figuration because it feels transcendent. And art, obviously, 21st century, we've lost that sense of transcendence, that sense of, like, things being deep, of depth, you know? And I feel like whenever you put a figure in a painting, like a full figure or like a person in it, you kind of connect to that sense of transcending, you know, that sense of history.
That's something I forgot.
Mm-hmm.
But in the latest artist talk, and I was surprised. But then I really looked at your work, and maybe it makes sense. But I want to hear it in your words. You're inspired by the arte povera.
Yeah.
And you say that it applies on your own work, but in what way?
Yeah, just conceptually, just giving me like the poetic freedom to do what I do. Like arte povera was interesting because it's kind of like what I said before, where when you see like an image on the streets, like a bus or a truck, and it's a perfect image, but after so many years, it gets scratched. That by itself becomes its own image. That by itself has its own agency. It has its own integrity. And I find it more interesting to get that directly and to pull that and put it into this context in which it's art. In arte povera, what they do is that they just get found objects and they collage them. They in a constructivist way, they make it into one pure thing, and they call that a sculpture, a statue, you know? And they were kind of the first ones to use that sort of informalism to kind of describe a narrative-like feeling, you know? And so for me, my work is narrative, but I approach it in a informalist, constructivist way because I'm accumulating images, and it's informal in the way I'm doing it. In arte povera, they do the same thing, you know? They kind of reject this notion of art, of bourgeois art in a sense, you know? And that type of movement is something where you read about it and you're like, wow, this makes complete sense. I can completely relate to this, and it kind of helps you have more freedom in the studio alone, you know? Because when you're a young artist and you're in the studio, everyone's in the studio with you. Your gallerist is in your head, your collectors are in your head, you're in your own head. And this is a quote by Philip Guston. And he said, hopefully by the end of your life, you're not even in the studio anymore. It's not even you there, but someone's there, you know? And reading about arte povera helped me like get closer to that somewhat, you know? Because I'm finding things from different places and putting it all in one thing.
How do you feel about the fact that you're not a painter? Just
Terrible.
like, terrible?
Terrible, yeah. I feel like a fake.
And what do you think about my opinion? I know it's all print.
Yeah.
I know there is no really painting action.
Yeah.
But I only see your works as paintings. I refuse to see them as prints.
Yeah. I thought that was a joke. I don't feel terrible about not being a painter. I just thought it'd be really funny if I said that.
Like, you're portraying yourself always like to be something. You really think about your image.
Yeah.
And the only time I kind of like had that you felt a bit insecure is when you were telling that you kind of feel like a fraud.
Yeah. But I like feeling like a fraud. I do wish that I was like the type of artist that like can be at a party and they do a perfect like portraiture of someone and you're like, wow, like that's why they're an artist. Like they chose to make it look a certain way. My practice really just comes from like resourcefulness and doing what I can with what I have, you know, and it's. Of course, I would love to be a painter because then practically it would be easier for me to communicate what I want to do. But I think that it's having these roadblocks and these difficulties and getting over them and kind of figuring out my own solutions to problems that makes the entirety of my practice. Because if I had the solutions to everything, then it would be impossible to make choices, you know? I have to find other ways to communicate the same feelings that a painter feels when they're in the studio.
I only see your works as paintings, and I refuse to see them as printing.
Right.
What do you think about it?
I'm really happy about that. Yeah, for me it's like the biggest, like it's the most important thing really. I feel like saying it's a print or saying it's a photograph is like completely devaluing it and making it super flat. You know.
I hope those people will come on to see the show, but our people ask me, yeah, what does he do? What is Nico Tovar? Is he a sculptor? He's a painter.
Yeah.
I want to know what they think when they saw you work. After they seen you work, actually.
Okay. Yeah, and that happens to me sometimes in the studio, where actually it's really funny. This one time there was a girl who had like really bad eyesight, and she came into the studio and she sees like this picture I printed, and she's like, "Wow, is that a painting? Holy shit, you're so good!" I was like, "What?" I was like, "You think I can paint that? Like I can't paint that." No, but that one, yeah, like that one is different.
It could easily be painted.
Yeah, but that one is more messy. You know what I mean? Like
but ask a painter to make this in a print form, you will not be able to do it.
Yeah.
And maybe you would not even be able to make it as a painting.
Yeah. But like my whole approach to it is the way that like abstract painters paint in a way, you know, where it's like just mark making, you know. And like instead of using a brush, I'm using an iron for these, you know. But yeah, I'm interested in what all these Brussels kids are gonna think of my paintings.
The only work that I really see as printing is the screenshot. That's the only.
Yeah. Well, that one
because it's like
it's
super kind of a direct act of the printing.
Yeah, like not completely.
You save an image and you print it.
Yeah, and it's the first time that I do that, and the reason I did that is because for me that work right there is like a self-portrait. I feel like this is the desktop that every artist has. You know, they have their hero in the back. For me, it's an Ed Ruscha painting. And then they have all the images that they're going to choose. So for me, this is like a behind-the-scenes work, you know? And so what I'm doing is that this is kind of a non-painting because indirectly, it's a Ed Ruscha painting. And what I did is that I projected my screensaver onto the canvas on which I painted. And I just took a photo of that and then put it on the same canvas. So there's kind of this relationship of before, after, and during. That's all in the same place when you see this work. That's why you can see like those marks there. Like tu peux pas le voir très bien, mais you can kind of see genre la toile. In that toile, yeah, go up to it. La toile there, you can see on the image, there's a canvas. I projected that on a wall, and the canvas that's on the wall there is the same canvas you're holding right now. Tu vois ce que je veux dire? That piece is really like about the process, about before, after, and during the painting, and my primary source, like one of my inspirations, and also the materials I'm using. So that work is really about like the act of being in the studio, the act of choosing, the act of making work, you know. And when I'm like so confident in the reason I make a piece, I'm becoming more okay with them being just flat images. Because at first, it's kind of like what you said, like I was insecure of not being a painter and making works with print because I felt like a fraud. And I would always try to make it seem not like an image. I would like this work right here that has the iron marks. I would have never done that 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago I would have been like, oh my god, they can tell it's an iron, you know? They can tell that like it was done with like a machine that anyone can buy. But the more I think of it, the more I think that that's part of the practice. And now I'm getting to a point where I'm confident just making flat images like these, you know? Images are just images. But the whole practice kind of sees them as paintings as well.
I think we can end the talk that particular work. When I saw it on like the
FaceTime?
Yeah, the FaceTime interview we had, I said, yeah, bring it, but please do not stretch it.
Yeah.
No, like now I cannot wait to see it stretch it.
Appreciate that. Well, Agnes Offshore Gallery, thank you for hosting this talk and for having me, and for getting me such a great space. Gracias, amigo.
No questions?
Yeah, I had a long night. Yeah.
What?